The twins' silent rebellion. The Whitaker mansion was silent that morning, too silent. The breakfast table gleamed under the chandelier, silver spoons polished, napkins folded into perfect shapes, a spread of fresh fruits, pancakes, and scrambled eggs waiting. Yet the food sat untouched. At the far end of the long table sat Madison and Chloe, the 4-year-old twin daughters of Millionaire CEO Alexander Whitaker. Both girls looked identical, with their golden curls tied into neat bows and expensive dresses chosen by their father's stylist. But their eyes were heavy with something deeper than childish stubbornness. Their small arms were crossed tightly across their chests, their little mouths firmly shut, not even a glance at the plates in front of them. "Girls, please," begged Mrs. Turner, the aging housekeeper whose apron was stained with mashed potatoes. She leaned forward, trying to coax them. "Just one bite, just one. You'll feel better." Nothing, not even a blink. The twins sat like two little ice sculptures, frozen in rebellion. For days, the staff had tried everything: fruit smoothies, chocolate pancakes, even bribes of toys. Nothing worked. The girls hadn't eaten a proper meal in almost 2 days. The tension in the mansion was reaching its breaking point. Because if Alexander Whitaker, one of the most powerful men in the city, came downstairs and found out his daughters were refusing to eat again, someone would pay the price. Everyone in the house knew his temper. His empire of glass towers and boardrooms had made him a billionaire, but inside his home he was just a father cracking under pressure, and when he cracked, everyone felt it. Mrs. Turner glanced nervously at the clock. "Oh no," she whispered. "He'll be here any minute." The kitchen door suddenly opened with a creak. The staff stiffened, but it wasn't Alexander. It was her, Layla Thompson, 28 years old, walked in with a smile so bright it seemed lit from within. She was nothing like the polished world of the Whitakers. Her worn-out jeans were frayed at the edges, her messy bun barely held together, and her sneakers glittered as if she had walked out of a children's craft store. She looked like she didn't belong, but somehow she carried herself as if she did. "Good morning," Layla said cheerfully, her voice cutting through the tension. "I got here early and I'm starving. Got any coffee?" Mrs. Turner blinked in surprise. "You are the nanny? The new one?" Layla extended her hand with enthusiasm. "First day. Layla, nice to meet you." Only Mrs. Turner shook it. The twins didn't move. They just stared at Layla like two wary gargoyles, testing her. Mrs. Turner whispered quickly, "They haven't eaten anything since yesterday. If Mr. Whitaker finds out, he'll—" "Don't worry," Layla said, placing her hands on her hips. "Leave it to me." Without hesitation, she strode toward the kitchen, opened the massive silver fridge like she owned the place, and began pulling out eggs, milk, flour, and a tub of butter. What are you doing?" the housekeeper asked, wide-eyed. Layla smirked. "Making pancakes. But not just any pancakes." She leaned closer, lowering her voice dramatically, as if sharing a secret with the twins. "The kind that smile back at you." For the first time, Madison's eyebrow twitched. Chloe's crossed arms loosened just a little. Layla noticed. She grinned. This wasn't just breakfast anymore. It was a battle. And Layla was about to fight it her way. The pancakes that smiled back. The kitchen of the Whitaker mansion had never seen anything like it. Usually it was a silent, almost sacred place where uniformed chefs prepared gourmet dishes under strict rules. But this morning, chaos and laughter began to take its place. Layla had rolled up her sleeves, tied her messy bun tighter, and claimed the giant marble counter as her battlefield. She cracked eggs into a large glass bowl, whisking with dramatic flair as if she were on a game show. Milk splashed, flour puffed up like a cloud, and even the butter landed with a noisy plop. The housekeeper gasped in horror at the mess spreading across the counter, but Layla only winked. "Relax," she said. "A little mess is the best seasoning." She turned toward the twins and exaggerated a sniff of the batter. Do you smell that? It smells like fun." Madison and Chloe, still perched at the breakfast table, watched with unblinking eyes. They had ignored chefs who served golden waffles and cooks who plated fruit like art pieces. Yet something about this strange nanny with glitter sneakers was different. She wasn't trying to trick them. She wasn't begging or bribing. She was just having fun. And for two little girls who had spent most of their lives in a mansion filled with order and rules, fun felt like something rare and precious. Layla poured the batter onto the hot pan, letting it sizzle and bubble. But she didn't just make ordinary pancakes. She took a spoon and shaped two circles for eyes and a curve for a smile. When she flipped it, the pancake looked like a happy face grinning up at them. "Ta-da!" she announced, holding it up proudly. "Breakfast that smiles back. No tricks, no bribes, just happiness on a plate." Mrs. Turner muttered under her breath, shaking her head. "Mr. Whitaker will have a heart attack when he sees this kitchen." But even she couldn't hide the sea. Moll tugged at her lips as she noticed the twins shifting in their chairs. Madison leaned forward ever so slightly, her arms uncrossing, while Chloe tilted her head, almost curious. Layla didn't miss it. She placed the pancake on a small plate and slid it across the counter toward them. "This one's for you two," she said gently. "But be careful. I think he's trying to tell you a joke." She pressed her ear to the pancake as if listening. Oh my. He says, "Don't eat me, I'm too sweet." For the first time in 2 days, a sound cracked through the air. Not from the staff, not from clinking dishes, but from Chloe. A tiny giggle, quick and shy, but real. Madison tried to hold back, but the corners of her mouth betrayed her with a twitch. Layla clapped her hands dramatically. "See? He's a comedian pancake. Who knew breakfast could be this funny?" She made another one, this time adding blueberry eyes and a strawberry nose. Soon a little stack of smiling pancakes sat proudly on the counter, each face sillier than the last. The twins glanced at each other. For most of their short lives, they had shared everything: clothes, toys, secrets. They had also shared silent protests, their stubbornness reinforcing each other. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, they were sharing something else: curiosity. Chloe reached forward, hesitantly picking up the pancake with blueberry eyes. She looked at it for a long moment, her small fingers brushing the edges as if it might vanish. Then, with one cautious bite, she tore off a piece. The room froze. The housekeeper gasped. Even Layla held her breath. And then Chloe chewed, slowly, carefully, and finally, she swallowed. Madison's eyes widened. "Is it good?" she whispered, breaking her own silence. Chloe gave a tiny nod, her lips forming the faintest smile. Layla exhaled with triumph. "Well, don't let her eat them all. Better grab one before they disappear." She pushed another plate forward, and Madison, after a moment of hesitation, reached out too. Soon both girls were nibbling on smiling pancakes, their giggles bubbling louder with every bite. Mrs. Turner stood frozen, her hand pressed to her chest. She whispered, almost in disbelief, I don't believe it. They're eating." Layla only shrugged playfully. "Told you. The trick isn't the food, it's the fun." But even as she celebrated her small victory, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the grand staircase. The air in the room shifted instantly, joy replaced by nervous tension. Alexander Whitaker was awake. The twins froze, their laughter dying as quickly as it had begun. Mrs. Turner started fumbling with napkins, trying to clean the counter. The staff stiffened like soldiers awaiting a commander's inspection. Only Layla remained calm. She looked at the mess of flour on the counter, the butter smudged on her sleeve, the smiling pancakes scattered like cartoon characters, and then at the twins, who had actually taken bites of food for the first time in days. The door opened, and there he was, tall, commanding, dressed sharply even for morning, with a presence that filled the room like thunderclouds. His eyes swept the kitchen, landing on the messy counter and the strange young woman who clearly didn't belong. "What is going on here?" Alexander's voice was low but sharp, like the crack of glass. The twins instantly shrank into their chairs. The staff froze, waiting for his temper to erupt. But Layla, she didn't flinch. She simply smiled, holding up a plate with the happy-face pancake still warm and steaming. "Breakfast, Mr. Whitaker," she said cheerfully, and for once they're actually eating it. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm, a clash at the breakfast table. Alexander Whitaker stepped into the kitchen like a storm entering a calm sky. His polished shoes struck the marble floor with a precision that made the staff instinctively straighten their posture. His suit was dark, his tie perfectly knotted, and his expression carved from stone. For years, his reputation as a millionaire CEO had been built not only on his sharp business mind, but also on his cold authority. Every room he entered, whether it was a boardroom or his own mansion, bent to his control. But this morning, as his eyes scanned the mess of flour on the counter and the odd sight of pancakes shaped like smiling faces, his composure cracked with something closer to outrage. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice low but dangerous. His gaze shifted from the messy counter to the housekeeper, who instantly dropped her head, terrified. "Mrs. Turner?" The housekeeper stammered, her voice shaking. Sir, it's the new nanny. She was only trying to—" Alexander cut her off with a sharp gesture of his hand. His eyes finally settled on Layla, who stood with a plate in her hands, looking entirely unbothered by the tension that suffocated everyone else. "You," he said, his voice narrowing like a blade. "You're the new hire?" Layla nodded, her smile unwavering. "That's me, Layla Thompson. Nice to finally meet you, Mr. Whitaker." She held out the plate toward him as though he hadn't just entered like a thundercloud. "Pancake?" The audacity in her tone made the room feel like it had tilted. No one spoke to Alexander Whitaker like that, not business partners, not employees, not even close family. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to the twins who were sitting stiffly in their chairs, staring at their father with wide, anxious eyes. He noticed something he hadn't seen in days, crumbs on their plates, a faint trace of syrup on Chloe's lips. For a moment, his anger flickered into something else. Surprise, maybe, relief. But the hardened man inside him quickly shoved it away. "They are eating," Layla continued, as if she had already won the argument. "Not just nibbling, not pretending, actually eating." She gestured toward the twins, who were frozen under their father's gaze. All it took was a little laughter, and a lot less pressure. The room was so quiet that the ticking of the kitchen clock sounded deafening. The staff dared not move. The twins' tiny fingers gripped the edge of their chairs, unsure of whether their father's reaction would bring punishment for them too. Alexander stepped closer, his towering presence swallowing the space between him and Layla. "This is not a playground, Miss Thompson. This is my house. My daughters will not be raised like fools entertained by circus tricks. They need structure, discipline, and order." His voice carried the weight of years of power. He was a man who had built empires, and to him, authority was the only language that kept chaos at bay. Layla did not back away. Instead, she tilted her head, her messy bun wobbling slightly, her glitter sneakers catching the morning light. "With all due respect, Mr. Whitaker," she said calmly, "your daughters don't need another general barking orders at them. They need a father who remembers what it feels like to smile." The staff gasped as if she had slapped him. Even Mrs. Turner's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the counter. No one, not in all the years of working for Alexander Whitaker, had ever dared to speak to him like that. Alexander's face hardened further, his jawline tightening like stone. "Watch yourself," he warned, his voice cold. "You forget who you are speaking to." But Layla's eyes didn't waver. They were steady, clear, and filled with something stronger than defiance, conviction. "I know exactly who I'm speaking to," she replied. "I'm speaking to a man who has more money than he knows what to do with, yet can't get his own daughter to eat a bite of food because they're too afraid of disappointing him. Maybe what they need isn't another chef or another lecture. Maybe they just need someone willing to make a pancake with a smile." The silence that followed was crushing. The twins sat frozen, their little hearts pounding, torn between fear of their father and the strange comfort of this new woman who spoke truths no one else dared to. Their eyes darted from Alexander to Layla, waiting to see which world would win, the world of cold rules or the world of laughter and kindness. Alexander's hand tightened on the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening. He could feel his authority being challenged in front of his own staff, in his own home. But deeper, beneath the layers of anger and pride, something gnawed at him, the truth in her words. He had seen his daughters shrink every time he raised his voice. He had seen their silence stretch longer and longer, their giggles fading from the halls of his mansion. And here they were, with crumbs on their plates and syrup on their lips, evidence that this stranger had succeeded where he had failed. Still, pride was not an easy beast to silence. His voice came out colder than ice. "You may have gotten lucky this morning, Miss Thompson," he said, stepping back, "but don't mistake one small victory for understanding my daughters. You have no idea what they need." Layla finally set the plate of pancakes down on the counter, folding her arms. "Maybe not yet," she admitted softly, "but I do know what they don't need, and that's more fear." For the first time in years, someone had stood their ground against Alexander Whitaker. The twins could sense it. Mrs. Turner could sense it. Even Alexander himself could feel it, though he would never admit it aloud. This wasn't the end of their clash, it was the beginning, and as he turned sharply, leaving the kitchen in sigh, Layla knew one thing with certainty. She had just declared war on the walls of fear built around this family. Secrets behind silent plates. After the clash in the kitchen, the mansion's walls seemed to hold their breath. The staff whispered quietly in corners, trading nervous glances, wondering if the bold new nanny would last even a week under Alexander Whitaker's roof. His reputation was unforgiving. Employees who stepped out of line were usually gone by morning. Yet to everyone's surprise, when noon came, Layla was still there. No termination papers, no suitcases by the door. Only the faint sound of the twins' laughter drifting down the hallway, as if the mansion itself had not heard such a sound in years. Alexander, in his study upstairs, pretended to work. He sat at his massive oak desk, papers spread before him, but his eyes betrayed him. They weren't on the numbers or the contracts. His attention kept straying to the faint voices rising from the garden below. Through the wide glass windows, he could see them. Madison and Chloe, usually stiff and guarded, were now chasing each other across the grass, their curls bouncing as their laughter echoed like little bells. And in the middle of it all was Layla, barefoot now, running with them as though she wasn't a paid employee, but a sister, a friend, or something even closer. His jaw tightened. It unsettled him. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. His daughters were supposed to be raised with structure, polish, and discipline, the same foundation that had carried him from a poor boy with nothing into a man with everything. He had built his empire on control, and he believed with every fiber of his being that control was what protected people from chaos. Yet here, in broad daylight, the stranger he had hired was tearing his structure apart with nothing more than silly games and messy pancakes. And the worst part? It was working. By evening, the staff reported that the twins had eaten not one but 2 full meals. They had even asked for seconds. That news alone should have been a relief, yet instead it felt like a thorn lodged deep in Alexander's pride. For weeks, specialists, child psychologists, and nutritionists had been paraded through his doors, each one charging more than most people's yearly salary, yet none had managed to break through. And now this young woman with glitter sneakers and stubborn confidence had done it in less than a day. Something wasn't right. That night, as the mansion settled into silence, Alexander called Mrs. Turner into his study. She arrived nervously, wringing her hands in her apron. "Yes, sir?" He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "This new nanny, what do you make of her?" The housekeeper hesitated, eyes darting toward the floor. She's unusual, sir. Not like the others. She doesn't seem to care about rules or appearances. But the girls listen to her, more than they ever listened to anyone else." Alexander's brow furrowed. "Too quickly," he muttered. "It doesn't make sense. Children don't change overnight." Mrs. Turner swallowed hard. "With respect, sir, maybe what they needed wasn't another set of rules. Maybe they just needed someone who saw them as little girls instead of heirs." Her voice trailed off into silence, the weight of her honesty hanging in the air. Alexander dismissed her with a curt nod, but her words gnawed at him. He turned toward the large portrait above the fireplace, a painting of his late wife, Eleanor. Her soft eyes and gentle smile stared back at him, captured forever in oils and canvas. He had lost her 2 years ago, and though he never admitted it, her absence had left a hollow space that even his millions couldn't fill. He had tried to replace her warmth with order, with structure, with unshakable authority. But maybe the girls had needed their mother's softness and his charms. He had given them only steel. The following morning, Alexander made a decision. Instead of confronting Layla again, he would observe her, quietly. He would see for himself whether this so-called miracle was real or merely a fluke. From the shadow of his study doorway, he watched as Layla served breakfast again. No fine china, no stiff silence. She had spread a picnic blanket right on the kitchen floor. Madison and Chloe sat cross-legged, giggling as Layla poured milk into mismatched mugs and handed out toast cut into funny shapes. "Look," she said, holding up a piece. "A little bread star for Madison and a bread heart for Chloe. And for me, a bread dinosaur, because why not?" The girls burst into laughter. Alexander felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Envy. Envy that this stranger could coax joy from his daughters in ways he could not. But as he turned away, something else caught his ear. The laughter faltered when Chloe asked, almost in a whisper, "Do we have to be quiet when Daddy comes in?" Madison nodded quickly, her eyes dropping to her plate. "If we laugh too loud, he gets mad," she murmured. The words cut deeper than Alexander expected. He leaned back against the wall, the weight of them pressing down on him. In that moment, he realized the twins' refusal to eat had never been about food at all. It had been about fear, a fear he himself had created without even realizing it. And yet, instead of softening, his pride dug in deeper. If Layla had uncovered this truth, then she had power over him, and Alexander Whitaker could never afford to be vulnerable. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mansion's tall glass windows, he made another decision. He would find out exactly who Layla Thompson was, where she came from, what her motives were, and why she seemed so determined to break through walls he had spent years building. Because if there was one thing Alexander had earned in his empire of power, it was this: no one changed his world without a reason. And Layla Thompson had just become the greatest puzzle of his life. Shadows of the past. The next few days unfolded like a strange tug-of-war inside the Whitaker mansion. On one side was Layla, transforming the once sterile home into a place where laughter echoed in hallways and messy crayons covered pristine white tables. On the other side was Alexander, retreating further into suspicion as he watched from the edges, his pride caught between relief that his daughters were finally eating and unease that it was happening because of someone else. The staff couldn't hide their astonishment. Madison and Chloe, who had once sat silently through meals like little stone statues, now raced down the stairs each morning to meet Layla. They begged her to make animal-shaped sandwiches, demanded bedtime stories with silly voices, and even began humming small tunes as they brushed their teeth. To outsiders, it would have seemed like nothing short of a miracle. But to Alexander Whitaker, it felt like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Late one night, long after the lights had dimmed across the mansion, Alexander sat in his study with his laptop open, the glow reflecting in his sharp eyes. He typed in the name Layla Thompson and let the screen fill with results. Dozens of social media profiles, job listings, and background checks scrolled past his gaze. But Alexander was not a man who skimmed. He was a man who hunted. In the corporate world, he had made enemies vanish and competitors fall. Now, he applied the same scrutiny to the nanny who had stepped into his daughters' lives too easily, too effectively. He found fragments first. A college she had once attended but hadn't finished. Jobs as a waitress, a librarian's assistant, a part-time tutor. Nothing extraordinary, nothing glamorous, certain. Not the resume of someone trained to handle the unique difficulties of two stubborn children raised in privilege. And yet Alexander's instincts told him there was more. People did not just appear in his world without reason. When the usual search failed, he called in a favor from one of his private investigators, a man named Callahan who had served him faithfully for over a decade. By the next afternoon, a slim folder landed on Alexander's desk. Inside were details that newspapers never printed, stories that social media never carried. Layla Thompson had grown up not far from the mansion, just across the city, in a neighborhood that most wealthy families drove through without rolling down their windows. Her father had abandoned the family early, her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, And Layla had been the oldest of three siblings, effectively raising the younger two while still a child herself. Alexander's eyes narrowed as he turned the pages. Teacher's notes spoke of a bright girl who hid her own hunger so her siblings could eat. Old neighbors described her as the girl with the messy hair who always had a joke to make the little ones smile. A photo showed her at 16, sitting on the steps of a rundown building, holding a sandwich in one hand while balancing a toddler on her knee. The grin on her face was unmistakable. It was the same fearless smile she wore now, the smile that seemed to undo every wall in his house. He closed the folder sharply, as if the truths inside threatened to burn him. This was no ordinary nanny. This was a woman forged in hardship, carrying lessons of survival and sacrifice that no amount of wealth could replicate. She hadn't read about resilience in textbooks. She had lived it. And that, Alexander realized with a hollow feeling in his chest, was why his daughters had chosen her. They recognized something in her that he had failed to give them, genuine warmth born from struggle, not manufactured through wealth. Meanwhile, downstairs in the playroom, Layla was oblivious to the quiet investigation unfolding around her. She was on the floor with Madison and Chloe building towers out of colorful blocks. "Higher, higher," Madison squealed, balancing a final piece on the swaying tower. Chloe clapped her hands, her eyes shining. When the tower collapsed in a dramatic crash, the twins erupted into laughter, rolling on the carpet as Layla joined them with exaggerated groans of defeat. "See?" Layla teased, dusting off her jeans. "Sometimes things fall apart. Doesn't mean you stop building. You just try again." The words were simple, tossed out like playroom chatter, but Alexander, standing in the doorway unseen, felt them pierce deeper than he wanted to admit. He had built his life on towers of glass and steel, forcing perfection at every step. But maybe that was why his daughters had grown so quiet, because they were afraid of what would happen if they let anything fall. He stepped back into the shadows, retreating to his study before they could see him. He wasn't ready to face the contradiction boiling inside him, the pride of a father who wanted control, and the guilt of a man realizing that his control had starved his daughters of joy. But Alexander Whitaker was not a man who surrendered easily. If Layla thought she could simply waltz into his house and undo years of his rules, she was mistaken. He would allow her to stay, yes, but only until he understood her fully, only until he uncovered what her true motives were. Because in his world, nothing happened by accident. And though he didn't know it yet, the more he dug into Layla's past, the closer he would come to uncovering not just her secrets, but his own. Secrets buried in silence. Secrets that explained why his daughters had turned away from food and laughter in the first place. For the first time in a long while, the empire of Alexander Whitaker was trembling, not because of a competitor, not because of the markets, but because of a nanny who knew how to make children smile. The hidden wound. The days turned into a rhythm that unsettled Alexander more than any hostile takeover ever had. Every morning, he found himself listening unconsciously for the sound of giggles drifting up from the dining room. It was a sound he had not heard in years, not since before Eleanor's illness had taken her away. Madison and Chloe were changing slowly, steadily, under Layla's care. They were eating again, not just cautiously, but with real appetite, their cheeks fuller, their eyes brighter. And yet, instead of relief filling him, Alexander felt a gnawing unease. Something about it all felt too fragile, like a glass dome balancing on the edge of a table. One wrong move, one careless slip, and it would shatter into silence again. One evening, as the mansion's halls fell quiet, Alexander walked into the playroom unannounced. He paused in the doorway, unnoticed, as Layla sat cross-legged on the carpet with Madison nestled against her shoulder and Chloe curled in her lap. A children's book lay open, its pages filled with colorful illustrations, but Layla wasn't reading the words. She was speaking softly, telling a story of her own. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice steady but warm, "there were two princesses who lived in a castle so tall that its windows touched the clouds. They had golden hair and matching crowns, but even though they had everything, they felt very alone. Because one day their mother, the queen, had to go away, and the king loved them, but he forgot how to smile, and the castle grew quiet." Madison's eyes widened. Chloe tightened her grip around Layla's arm. Alexander's breath caught in his chest. He knew this story wasn't from any book. This was his life laid bare, spoken aloud in the simplest words. But then, Layla continued, brushing a strand of hair from Madison's face, someone came to remind the king and the priest incesses that castles are not meant to be quiet. Castles are meant to echo with laughter and songs, and maybe even a little bit of mess, she winked, earning a faint giggle from Chloe. And do you know what happened? What? Whispered Madison. The princesses began to laugh again, and the king, well, maybe, just maybe, he remembered how. Alexander stepped back before they saw him. His chest felt heavy as though the walls of his carefully built empire were pressing inward. He retreated to his study and poured himself a glass of whiskey, but it did little to steady the storm inside him. Layla had seen through everything, his authority, his pride, even his grief. And somehow, she had given words to what he had tried so hard to bury. The silence in the house had not been born from rebellion, but from loss. That night he couldn't sleep. He found himself wandering the empty halls, stopping at the door of the twins' bedroom. He pushed it open quietly. They were asleep, curled up close to one another, their faces relaxed, their little breaths steady. On the nightstand sat 2 empty plates smeared with crumbs and jam, evidence of another meal successfully eaten. Yet what struck him most was the small photograph propped between their beds. It was an old family picture taken before Eleanor had fallen ill. The twins, barely toddlers then, sat on their mother's lap, her arms wrapped tightly around them, her smile radiant. Alexander was there too, standing tall in a tailored suit, but his expression was strained even then, his smile stiff and businesslike. The contrast was painful. The truth seeped into him slowly, like cold water filling cracks in stone. His daughters hadn't refused food because they were stubborn or spoiled. They had stopped eating because meals had once been moments of warmth shared with their mother. After her death, meals had turned into rituals of silence. He, under his strict watch, stripped of the comfort they once knew. Every bite had become a reminder of what was missing. And when his harsh voice replaced Eleanor's laughter, their little hearts had chosen hunger over fear. The next morning, Alexander found himself lingering in the hallway as breakfast began. Layla had once again laid a picnic blanket on the kitchen floor, pouring cereal into mismatched bowls. Madison sprinkled raisins into hers with glee, while Chloe carefully arranged banana slices like petals of a flower. "Look, Daddy!" Madison shouted when she spotted him. "We made breakfast art!" Her voice was bright, hopeful, filled with a spark that nearly undid him. For a moment, Alexander stood frozen, torn between his instinct to correct the chaos of bowls on the floor and the pull of his daughter's joy. He finally stepped forward, adjusting his cufflinks as though they were armor. "That's creative," he said, his tone softer than usual. Layla smiled knowingly, patting the blanket. "Care to join us, Mr. Whitaker? The castle is big enough for one more." He hesitated. Sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor in his tailored suit felt unthinkable. But Madison's wide eyes and Chloe's expectant smile chipped away at his pride. Slowly, stiffly, he lowered himself to the blanket. The floor was cold, his knees protested, but the twins' laughter as they handed him a bowl made it strangely bearable. For the first time in years, Alexander shared breakfast with his daughters, not at the long, intimidating dining table, but on the floor, where crumbs scattered freely and laughter drowned out silence. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing, just watching them eat with the kind of appetite he had almost forgotten they possessed. And though he tried to convince himself it was only temporary, only a small experiment, somewhere deep inside, Alexander Whitaker felt something stir, something dangerous, something that could either heal him or undo him completely. Because Layla was not only helping his daughters eat again, she was forcing him to confront the one thing he had sworn never to face, his own broken heart. The day the mansion breathed again, the transformation did not come overnight, but it came steadily, like the slow thaw of winter ice under the first warmth of spring. In the weeks that followed, the mansion, once suffocating in its silence, began to breathe again. Laughter drifted down staircases, toys littered corners once kept immaculate, and music hummed faintly from rooms where the twins danced in mismatched socks. The staff, who had grown accustomed to walking on eggshells, now found themselves smiling at work. It was as though a single spark, Layla's presence, had reignited a fire that had been long extinguished. But for Alexander Whitaker, the change was both liberating and terrifying. He had built his life on precision, order, and control, and here was proof that love could achieve what authority never had. Every time he saw Madison and Chloe giggling with jam-smeared faces, every time he watched them run into Layla's arms with trust he had never earned, he felt a pang of guilt. It was a guilt heavier than any boardroom failure, heavier even than the fortune he had carried on his shoulders. Because beneath it all, he finally understood that he had failed his daughters in the most important role of his life, not as a CEO, but as a father. The turning point arrived one evening at dinner. Layla had decided it was time to bring the family together at the long dining table again, not to impose order, but to reclaim it as a place of connection. The chandelier glowed warmly overhead as bowls of pasta and baskets of bread filled the polished surface. The twins bounced in their seats, their chatter filling the room with a kind of joy that almost made Alexander forget the years of silence. Yet as he sat across from them, the weight of the moment pressed on him. He had not truly spoken to his daughters, really spoken since Eleanor's passing. Layla, sensing his hesitation, broke the silence with her usual disarming humor. All right, rule number 1 tonight. No business talk, no phones, no scary CEO faces, just food, stories, and maybe a little fun. She winked at the twins, who giggled and immediately began sharing tales of their adventures with her in the garden. Madison talked about building a fairy house from sticks, while Chloe described how Layla had taught them to bake cookies that came out as more lumps than circles. Alexander listened quietly at first, his fork untouched, his posture stiff. But slowly, the walls around him began to crack. He found himself smiling faintly at Chloe's dramatic reenactment of their baking disaster, chuckling softly when Madison spilled noodles on her lap and shrugged it off with a laugh. The sound of his own laughter startled him, as though it had been locked away for too long. And then came the moment that unraveled him completely. Madison turned to him with wide eyes and asked innocently, "Daddy, are you happy?" The question struck like a blade to the chest. The room fell still. Chloe stared at him too, her fork clutched midair. Alexander's throat tightened, his heart pounding. For years he had hidden behind power, behind the armor of control, never allowing himself to admit weakness. But now, with his daughter's eyes searching his face, he couldn't lie. His voice cracked as he answered, "Not as happy as I should have been. Not with you." The twins blinked in surprise. Layla's gaze softened, and in that fragile pause, Alexander did something he had never allowed himself to do. He told the truth. He spoke of Eleanor, of how losing her had broken him, of how he had buried himself in work because it was easier than facing his grief. He admitted that his anger had been less about them disobeying and more about his own fear of failing them. His words tumbled out, sting but raw, the kind of confession that stripped him of the millionaire armor he had worn for so long. Madison slid off her chair and crawled into his lap, her little arms wrapping around his neck. Chloe followed, pressing her cheek against his chest. For a long moment, Alexander held them both, his eyes burning, his heart breaking open. The room was silent except for the sound of 3 hearts beating together, and for the first time in years, the Whitaker mansion felt like a home. Layla watched quietly, her own eyes glistening. She had not come here to heal a millionaire's family. She had only come to do her job. But somehow, in the act of teaching 2 little girls how to laugh again, she had reminded a grieving father how to live. From that night forward, meals were no longer battles. They became rituals of connection. Pancakes still made their way to the table on weekends, always with silly faces, and pasta dinners often ended with sauce on the tablecloth and laughter in the air. The mansion never returned to the cold silence it once knew. Instead, it grew into a place where imperfection was welcome, where messes were signs of life, and where love, not rules, set the rhythm of the home. Months later, Alexander stood in the garden, watching Madison and Chloe chase each other through the flowers while Layla looked on with a proud smile. He realized then that his fortune, His skyscrapers, his empire, all of it paled beside this moment. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about deals or deadlines. He was simply a father, grateful for a second chance. And though he never said it aloud, in the quiet of his heart he knew, the day Layla Thompson walked into his kitchen with glitter sneakers and messy hair had been the day his world began to change forever. The day the mansion stopped suffocating in silence. The day his daughters learned to laugh again. The day he highs. Myself remembered how,